I need to spotlight me and then record as well. Yeah, great. Thank you. Sorry, it's just for the benefit of those that are not here with us today. So yes, as I was saying, sorry, I was saying we're going to be exploring the second of these 5 spiritual faculties. So that of virya, that can be translated as Kusaladevi just said, and earlier on Parnasaki, energy in pursuit of the good, you know, or in that search, in that movement towards the good. So last week we were looking at faith, and the translation that we were using was around placing our hearts upon something. So a bit of a recap for those of you who weren't there last week. So the beginning of this journey starts with faith, and faith is a bit like the seed. Yeah. So we need to have that sort of a glimpse of something. So faith can be translated as our emotional response to the beauty of the ideal. So when we encounter the ideal, we are able to appreciate the ideal. There is a movement in relation to that. Yeah, and we explore different aspects of that. I'm going to show you a couple of images that we look at last week, and that also will help to do a bit of a recap around that. But Kusaladevi was talking just about inspiration, and inspiration is a very important aspect of a spiritual life. I'm probably going to talk a bit about art in this series. There is a lot that Bhante Sankarachita has written and has said about art and the importance of art in the spiritual life. But it's a particular word that I'm going to be using tonight, which is that of the Rasika. So Rasika is a sort of an application of another word, rasa. And rasa is that of, it means to taste. So it's a sort of aesthetic relish that you experience. It's very sensorial, yeah, or sensual, even if you want. So the Rasika is the taster, is the enjoyer. Yeah. So one of the things that we were looking at last week was that of pleasure and desire. Yeah. And we talked particularly of desire in relation to truth, for example, desire in relation to the ideal. So we talk about chanda, which is that positive aspect of desire. Even we use the word dharma chanda. Yeah? So that desire for the dharma, desire for the truth. And this is very important. Inspiration is very closely connected with creative states, and that's why I might say a bit more about art and artists later on in this series. But inspiration has a lot to do with energy. Yeah? So nothing can be accomplished without energy. Yeah? We need energy. That's the fuel. It's the basic. Is the fluid of life. Yeah? It's life itself. Yeah? And the two main practices, the two main meditation practices that you learn when you come to the Buddhist center or when you go to any center in Triratna, that of the mindfulness of breathing and the metta bhavana, have to do with energy. So how you work with your energy. So very briefly, with the mindfulness of breathing, what we try to do is to bring our energies together. Yeah, our physical or psychophysical energies as much as possible together around a center. Yeah. That center, in the case of the mindfulness of breathing, is the breath. Yeah. The breath is the anchor. With the metta bhavana, what we're trying to do is, after we have collected or recollected a bit of ourselves, a bit of our experience, we're trying to move, to channel that energy, in a way to refine that energy. And what we're trying to do is to connect that energy with something that is positive, yeah, something that is selfless, something that is beyond ourselves. Yeah? So in a way, you have already acquired a couple of very good tools to work with your energy. Yeah? But that might not be very easy. You know? We live in a very difficult time, if you want, in terms of how exposed we are to input in our society. Yeah. It's difficult nowadays to find a deep sense of satisfaction in what we do or in our everyday experience. Yeah. we are more and more distracted. We are constantly encouraged to consume more and more and to accumulate more and more stuff. And it's like a never-ending cycle, yeah, of always feeling a stimulation in the wrong direction. Yeah. So that's the desire going in the wrong direction. Yeah. So it's very important that we start looking at how can we work with our energies at that level. And the title of the talk tonight is The Perfection of Madness. Yeah. And the perfection of madness, I think it really resumes or pictures the situation that we live in nowadays. Yeah, we are more and more specialized. We are more and more capable of doing things, of producing things, of acquiring things, but not necessarily with a clear understanding of what we are doing or what's the purpose of that. Yeah? So it's a bit of a cliche nowadays, but you know that is a very famous phrase, that of the rat race. You know, but the rat race now it has permeated all aspects of our lives. It's always like almost like we are under the pressure of becoming an specialist in all areas of our lives. Yeah? And that's a bit strange, you know, that we are under so much pressure to perform, yeah, to be somebody, to have nowadays, you know, to have a sort of a public persona. Yeah? So how we look, how we appear to others, how invested we are in creating I was going to say Facebook, but that's you know that's the basic image, you know, that yeah, creating a way of presenting ourselves to the world. So we need to look at what is that we are pursuing, where are we placing our hearts upon. Yeah. And I'm going to borrow, for this talk in particular, I want to borrow from one of Bante's sources of inspiration, or one of these teachers in the West that Bante was borrowing from. His name is Edward Conce. I don't know if you have heard of him. Sangharachita, when I say Bante, I mean Sangharachita. Sangharachita mentions him a lot, especially when he's looking at the Prajna Paramita text or literature, that of the perfection of wisdom. And Edward Conce, who is a German Buddhist translator, basically, and scholar, he wrote a little essay called The Way of Wisdom, where he explores the 5 spiritual faculties. And he puts an example that is very close to home for me, because it's part of my culture. And he says the following. He says that Don Quixote, I don't know if you know the character of Don Quixote, is in literature the purest embodiment of faith. Yeah? So how he understands faith, let's see. Don Quixote vigorously, fearlessly, without complaining, and even serenely endures all tribulations because he wants to help others, all of them equally, according to their needs. His faith has conquered the senses. It transmutes the data of common sense experience. And in his delusion, in the delusion of Don Quixote, yeah, motivated by his faith, you probably have seen or have heard of this image of Don Quixote fighting the windmills because he believes they are giants. Yeah? Or he sees the barber's basin as the helmet of a king, a Moorish king. Or he puts himself in all these strenuous conditions because he is convinced that he is a knight and he's fighting for justice. So I was referring last week as well to a talk that Kusala Devi gave 2 weeks ago, where we were looking at the senses and our contact with stimuli. and how we interpret that, how we label that. In the case of Don Quixote, everything that came into his senses, he was interpreting that as part of a medieval drama, yeah, where he was the hero and he wanted to fight for justice. Yeah. And I really like a line from what Edward Conce says about Don Quixote. He says that in the case of Don Quixote, faith becomes slightly pathological. Yeah. So faith is a bit tricky to work with. Yeah, I mean, we can be very, very strongly convinced that we are right. Yeah, that our interpretation of reality is right, but we might be misguided by those ideas. Yeah? So it's very important that when we are looking at these faculties, we remember that they in itself, they cannot work individually. Yeah? They need a bit of a complement. So we're going to be looking at that tonight, a bit of that. So if I'm going to share with you very quickly, something that we were looking at last week. Let me just, it's a bit bigger. Okay. So last week we were looking at faith, as we have just remind everybody. And then we make a connection between faith or Shraddha and Ratnasambhava and Mamaki. Tonight we're going to be looking at Virya or vigor. And there is a connection, there's a connection between these. I don't know if you can see that. Well, it should say at the top of the page, it should say Amoghasiddhi and Green Tara. I don't know if you can see that. So it's a connection between Amoghasiddhi and Green Tara with Virya and vigor. That's something that I would like to explore with you tonight as well. So let me just stop there. So in that representation that I just showed you, there are these 5 spiritual faculties are arranged in pairs. So usually when we explore faith, the quality that balance faith is wisdom. And when we look at Virya or energy, the quality that balances Virya is that of Samadhi or meditation. But I'm going to try something different tonight. I'm going to look at the relationship between faith and Virya. Yeah, so in a way we have started already that exploration. Yeah, let me go back to my notes. So faith in the Buddhist tradition is closely related with effort. Yeah. And this is probably something that is not new for some of you. Yeah. It may be new for others. So tonight, maybe some of you are going to listen again to some things that we have said in different talks or courses or events. But it doesn't matter really. You know, the Buddha said in the Dhammapada that the non-repetition is the stain of the teaching, the stain of the truth. Yeah. So, and we very easily forget. Yeah. Probably some of you, that recap that I did probably helped some of you to remember what we did last week. Yeah. It's very easy to forget. It's very easy to forget what we did this morning, for example, what we did yesterday. Yeah. So, and that's a quality that we're going to be exploring a bit more fully next week when we look at mindfulness and sati. But effort is very important in Buddhism. There's another list. I'm sorry, I'm going to mention a couple of lists tonight on top of the 5 spiritual faculties. There is another list that is directly recommended by the Buddha, which is that of the 4 right efforts. And effort in this list is also similar in meaning to exertion. Yeah, exertion. And that's interesting. I'm going to be looking at that as well in a moment. But just as an introduction to this, I'm not going to be looking at this very in detail, but just to remind you what these 4 right efforts are. There are 2 who have to do with unskillful qualities. So one of them is preventing, the first one is preventing the arising of evil, unskillful qualities that have not yet arisen. The literal word in Pali can be translated as non-arising. Yeah, it's the non-arising of those qualities. So what we do in order to prevent that those negative qualities, that unskillful qualities arise in our experience. The second effort is the abandonment of those evil or unskillful qualities that have already arisen in our experience. Evil in the Buddhist tradition is equal to unskillfulness. Yeah? Though we're going to be looking at negative emotions tonight as well. So we're going to be looking at evil in the face tonight. And there's another side of this, the 4 efforts, which is positive. It's in relation to the positive qualities or skillful qualities. So one of them is the arising or the cultivation of skillful qualities that have not yet arisen. Yeah? So those skillful qualities that we aspire to develop in ourselves. And the last one, and I love this one when I was preparing for this talk, because the word in Pali is titya. And it's one of those pithy, very short words in Pali that is very rich in meaning. So this word means the maintenance, the non-confusion, the increase, plenitude, development, and culmination of skillful qualities that have arisen in ourselves. Yeah? So usually we translate this just as maintaining or sustaining the skillful, but this is much more rich than that. It says non-confusion, increase, plenitude, development, and culmination of skillfulness. And there is an element of culmination as well around the 5 spiritual faculties that we are going to be looking at throughout this series. So there are classic examples from the times of the Buddha around right effort. So some of you probably remember the story of Sona, the lute player. So that the Buddha found one of his disciples walking up and down to the point with a lot of effort, trying to concentrate, trying to really apply himself to the point that in that walking, endless walking, tireless walking, he cut the soil of his feet. Yeah, and he was bleeding to the point of bleeding. And the Buddha gives him. It happens that this disciple was a lute player before joining the Sangha, and the Buddha just reminds him how what's the perfect sound that a chord, in a guitar or in a lute can make. If it's too tight, it just breaks. It doesn't sound. If it's too loose, it doesn't make any sound. So it's just finding the right level of tightness, yeah? Or the right level of effort, we can say in this case. Another story that I love around right effort is that of Ananda, the Buddha's attendant. So some of you probably have heard this name, Ananda. A lot of what we have received from the Pali Canon is something, our discourses, our experiences that the Ananda had of the Buddha. Yeah, so it's Ananda remembering what the Buddha saying in a particular occasion. Ananda was an attendant to the Buddha for more than 20 years, and he was also a cousin of the Buddha, so he was a blood relative of the Buddha. But it happens that at the time of the Buddha, Ananda, despite being so closely connected with the Buddha, he wasn't an enlightened being. So not long after the Buddha's death, all the elders in the Sangha, those enlightened members of the Sangha, decided to have what is called in the Buddhist tradition the first council. So councils have have a very long tradition within Buddhism. And this, in this council, they were trying to collect the teachings of the Buddha to preserve that legacy. So the story goes and says that Ananda, though despite being, the one that could remember, he had a prodigious memory, remember all these stories, he wasn't allowed to enter this council because he wasn't an enlightened being. So the story goes and says that Ananda applied himself very strongly with very strong determination. And just at the point that it was the night before the beginning of the council, and he wasn't still enlightened, yeah? And he was still meditating. He was applying himself in meditation. So he says the story that he came the first part of the night, Ananda was meditating still without realizing the truth. The second part of the night, the third part of the night, came the last part of the night, and it was just about to break the day. And at that point, Ananda gave up. Ananda decided that it was futile to carry on. He was too tired. He was just going to rest, just to put his head on a rock and sleep. So he was convinced that he wasn't going to be part of the council. And the story says that in the process of Ananda laying down to put his head on the bed, when he fully relaxed and he could experience the fruits of his efforts, at that moment, enlightenment happened. So there's something very important here about how we apply ourselves. Bhante Sangarachita talks about the importance of poses and empty spaces. So it's good that we make effort, that we apply ourselves, but we also need to make a space just to be, without any goal, without any direction. So that's the image as well that we were using last week of the mandala. Just to be in this present moment as fully as we can, with as many aspects of ourselves as we can. And then, a bit jumping a bit to another list, maybe a bit abruptly, but just aware of time. Another way of looking at energy is the way we engage with the world around us. So another way of looking at this is that of the Tantric Precepts. So I'm just going to remind you of that as well. So you all have been introduced to this basic idea of Sila, or ethics in Buddhism. So actions in Buddhism are skillful or unskillful on dependence of the volition. So what is our motivation? What is that mental initial impulse or energy around that? But we can, in the Tantric tradition, we look at the opportunity for awakening here and now, at every moment. So the Tantric Precepts basically express that opportunity for awakening in relationship of energy and our interaction with others. So the first precept can be expressed as, do not obstruct the energy of another person. The second precept, do not drain the energy of others and give freely of your own energy. The third precept, do not misuse energy. The fourth, using for whatever purpose the energy appropriate for the purpose, not inappropriate. And the fifth one, do not allow energy to become turgid and to keep it bright and clear. So clarity is important in this process. And we are going to be looking more fully at the quality of clarity in the next few weeks. So faith on its own is not enough. Energy following that initial response to what we desire can be intoxicating, can be misguided. We need to cultivate clarity. And when we look at the forthright efforts, when we look at the Tantric Precepts, we are trying to move towards something that probably we are not. Probably is an ideal state for us. Another idea that is very important in Buddhism is that of the going forth. Yeah, it's in the life of the Buddha. You can think in terms of your own life around renunciation. How renunciation looks in your lives. And in this case, it's a bit more subtle, that what is suggested in the life of the Buddha with the going forth. It's not so much about leaving behind a whole set of conditions, though sometimes some of us need to do that in order to grow and to develop. Yeah. In this case, you can start thinking of renunciation that is more to do with your day-to-day being. Yeah. So renouncing anger, for example, renouncing obsessive compulsive behavior, yeah, our addictions, if we have them, renouncing our harsh inner critic, yeah, renouncing those tendencies that we have to judge ourselves. Yeah. And this has to do a lot with the four right efforts. Yeah? Renunciation is about abandoning and preventing. So you can think of renunciation in terms of the first two efforts. But also you can think of renunciation in terms of when you enter in contact with a positive mental state, when you are cultivating a positive mental state, as soon as you are starting to enter that set of mind, that state, you are abandoning a negative one. Yeah? So if we create a space in our lives to live more fully, to be more happy, we are decreasing the amount of energy that we are putting into perpetuating our unhappiness, yeah? Our tendencies towards unhappiness. And this is an interesting thing here about a strain. Sometimes we need to strain ourselves, that exertion that the four right efforts suggest. And maybe at the beginning, we were looking last week as well at faith being, there's an intellectual quality to faith. But at the beginning, if we are just convinced by the ideas that we encounter in the Dharma, we might be straining ourselves. We haven't yet developed the foundations, if you want, yeah, that are going to sustain that movement. So Sangha talks of an individual. When you force, I'm just going to read this. When you force your organism to go along in accordance with something that you've merely thought because you thought it, then there is great strain on the organism. So he says something about being an unbalanced person, a person whose thinking is in excess of his emotional development, and so on. And that is individualism. To become an individual, so Bhante talks a lot about individuality. Yes, that's another idea that you might encounter, and I'm going to be using this idea indeed during this series. To become an individual, what you have to do is to restrain your one-sided intellectual development and cultivate your emotional side, or the other way around. Yeah? In my case, for example, when I encounter the Dharma, when I encounter Buddhism, my initial response was very devotional, was a lot of faith. And in a way, what I needed to do was to restrain that devotional aspect of my experience a bit, not completely, and develop that other intellectual, that more, in a way, more rational or logical understanding of the teachings. Yeah. But what is suggesting, Bhante is suggesting here, Sangha is suggesting here, is that we need to balance our tendencies. Yeah, and this is a very interesting journey. What I'm inviting you to is a very interesting journey of self-discovery in a way. Yeah, what are you made of? What of these faculties is strongest in you? And just aware of time, and I really want to show you. a couple of things that I want to develop. So we're looking at this positive side, yeah, of energy, how we apply energy in pursuit of the good. But it might be that in our experience, what we are more familiar with is negative mental states, yeah, negative emotions. So I'm going just to look at that a bit more in detail, and I'm going to share the screen again with you. So last week we were looking at this tree, the poisonous tree of the 6 kleshas. Yeah? And remember that kleshas can be translated as poison, basically, or a stain. So last week we were looking at avidya, or ignorance, and from avidya, in the roots of this tree, sprung vicikitsa, doubt or indecision, and mana, conceit or arrogance. And we were looking in particular to mada, or intoxication. This week, I want us to look a bit more in detail to pratiga, or ill will, enmity, and anger, and particularly two aspects of our negative emotions: defensiveness and jealousy or envy. And this is very important for us because one of the purposes of this exploration that we are doing on views or wisdom is how those affect our relationships within the Sangha. I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. So let me show you this. This is something that Bhante Sangharachita talks about in living ethically. So again, returning to this idea of the 5 precepts, how to work with the 5 precepts. And negative emotions, he says that negative emotions are much more common than positive emotions. So it's important that we, in a way, educate ourselves. We learn to differentiate them. So you, in the screen you have at the moment anger. So anger is basically energy. Yeah. So it's a momentary explosive nature, often being the result of a build-up of frustrated energy. Yeah. So we all have experienced that, frustrated energy that is not quite flowing or connected with our goals or where our desires are moving. But anger can be transformed to hatred or resentment. Yeah. And that's a more settled anger, the result of brooding over one's own wrongs, real or imagined. And this is very important, yeah, our mental states here, how we paint the world we inhabit, so that one's mind is slowly poisoned. Hatred is the experience of pain accompanied by the idea of an external cause. So we experience pain, and what we do is to look around and blame something or somebody of our experience. Then there is enmity, which goes even further, being the persistent desire to harm another person. While hatred is a mental attitude, enmity consists in attempting actually to harm the object of your aversion, even over a period of years. So in the Metavavana, when we talk of the 4th stage, sometimes we refer to that stage as a stage of the enemy. Yeah. And it's good that we are frank with ourselves. I mean, they might be maybe objects, as much as there are objects of desire in our experience, there might be objects of our hatred as well. Yeah, it might be a public figure, it might be a politician, it might be somebody, you know, with whom you have a grudge for many, many years, somebody from your childhood even. Yeah. And then there is malice, which is much more, you know, this is just it's a complete perversion in a way of the will, the human will. So it's gratuitous hatred, the delight in inflicting suffering on others for its own sake, regardless of whether they have done you any harm. So these are very strong emotions. They are sort of a very heated emotions. But maybe there are a couple of emotions, the ones that I just mentioned in the diagram with the tree, that are much more accessible to us. So one is irsia, or jealousy, or envy. Yeah. Jealousy and envy, there is slightly different. So this is a highly perturbed state of mind with aversion, hatred, which is unable to bear others' excellencies by being overly attached to gain and honor. So we cannot recognize, we cannot allow, we cannot accept other people's success, other people's joys, other people's virtues. Yeah. It's that threatens our sense of being somebody. Threatens, for example, a very, very common example of jealousy or envy, you know, in a romantic relationship. It threatens the love, our connection with our partners or with the person that we are involved with. And the other is pradasa, which is a spite of defensiveness. It is a vindictive attitude preceded by indignation and resentment, forming part of anger. And its function is to become the basis for hard and strong words. It is the urge to use harsh words of disagreement due to anger and resentment when others raise one's shortcomings. So, it's a bit heavy, isn't it? And yeah, it's not to dwell too much in these negative energies, but the last connection that I want to make is that connection between hatred and wisdom. Yeah, and we are going to be moving through this series towards wisdom. Yeah. So the important thing to recognize about all these emotions is that they are energy. Yeah. They are energy that can be transformed. And hatred has a quality. Yeah. The quality of hatred is that it can cut through. Yeah. So if we are as Don Quixote, if we are dwelling in this intoxication with our own misunderstandings around the world, we can channel hatred in order to liberate ourselves from that. So, but that needs to be channeled. All that energy needs to be channeled. And hatred feels hot. Yeah, that's a quality of hatred. Hot. There is a word that I want to share with you, which is tapasya. Yeah. And this is what I'm going to close the talk tonight. So tapasya means heat. And tapasya is the heat that is created when you practice the Dharma, especially when you meditate. We're going to be looking at meditation in a couple of weeks as well. So that heat, that caloric quality is very important for life. Yeah. Like the sunshine, we need heat in order to be able. Yeah, we are animals of hot blood. Yeah, we need heat in order to be alive. Heat is something that sustains life. Yeah. So we need to find in ourselves those energies that sustain our intention, sustain our effort. And sometimes those energies are going to be very entangled with our negative emotions. So there is a process of purification that needs to happen. It's a process of moving, applying ourselves, through the 4 efforts, through the Tantric Precepts, through our understanding of the Dharma, clarifying our thinking, moving all those energies in pursuit of the good. And I'm going to close there.
Great, thanks very much. Loads there again, plenty to get stuck into. So I think if we're ready, Sadie, we'll just go straight into our groups and we'll come back just a couple of minutes before the end.